Hello folks, Bill Vales here. Last month we presented what is involved with purchasing a new computer. My guest this month is Nancy Hilsinger. Nancy is a longtime computer user and one of our post-production geniuses here at LCTV.
Whoa.
Welcome, Nancy.
Thanks, Bill. I'm very happy to be back.
Glad to have you back. Nancy, last month we started to talk about what is involved in purchasing a new computer. We went through some of the high-level considerations that a new user needs to consider.
Yeah, we did discuss how important it is for the user to think about what they're going to use the computer for. But we kind of glossed over some of the technical details that even a new user has to consider.
You're correct. We did gloss over a few things. Knowing what you are going to use the computer for is certainly very important. Understanding your requirements is always key to making a purchase. And that's true if you're buying a refrigerator, a blender, a car, or a computer. You have to know your requirements, what you're going to use things for. So what were some of the technical details that you thought we glossed over?
Well, we should talk about some of the technical features and terminology that all users are confronted with. I know whenever I was shopping for a computer, I was confronted with things like CPU, RAM, hard disks, USB, megabytes, gigabytes, and now we even have terabytes. But when I used to shop for computers, all I ever worried about was memory and storage. Mm-hmm. And however, after consulting with you, when I was going to purchase my computer this past summer, I found out there was a lot more to it, and I was glad that I had you to talk to because it made a big difference.
Yeah. Well, why don't we take each of these terms and concepts in order and discuss what they mean. And even the first-time buyer needs to understand some of these concepts. You don't need to know all the detail about them, but you have to have some understanding. So let's start with the CPU. Nancy, how would you describe what a CPU is?
I do know that CPU stands for Central Processing Unit. Yay me.
Perfect. That's correct. You can think of the CPU as the brains of the computer. The CPU controls the flow of information from the numerous devices on your computer into the system and out from the system. And a CPU looks like this.
Yeah,
so we have the CPU, and there's two sides to the CPU. And this side here, we're really not seeing anything other than the branding that's on here, and this is the name of the company. And then on the other side of the CPU, we have these pins, okay? These pins that would allow us to plug that CPU into the motherboard, which we're gonna get to.
Now, I've always had a question about, I hear the terms AMD and Intel when they talk about CPUs. What's that all about?
Sure. Well, those are two companies. AMD is Advanced Micro Devices, and that's the name of the company, and they make a processor. Intel is the name of Intel Corporation, and they make a bunch of CPUs too. So they're the names of companies that compete with one another. And Intel is a really, really large company, and AMD is not so large. But they've been competing for, I remember my first computer in the 90s had an AMD processor in it, so they've both been around for a while.
Yeah, the last one that I had before this one had an AMD processor in it. Now, why would you select one CPU over another?
Well, it comes down to price, performance, and personal preference. My personal preference is for Intel processors. I like the price performance for them, meaning sort of the bang for the buck that I get out of buying them. I like the level of choices in the Intel processor, that they come in a range of power and also speed. And speed is a very important thing with a CPU.
I would think so, yeah.
The faster the CPU goes, the faster your your entire computing experience is going to be. So my preference is for Intel. Okay, and Intel characterizes its primary set of computers by a designation called I. So you'll have like i3, i5, and i7. Those are the three types of processors they have. i3 being the cheapest, or they would say the most cost-effective. Okay, and i7 being the most expensive, and certainly the fastest with i5 in the middle.
Now, I get confused about, excuse me, the relationship between the motherboard and the CPU. I used to wonder whether the CPU was the motherboard or was it on the motherboard. Can you explain the difference?
I think so. I happen to have here a motherboard.
Just happen to have one.
Yeah, I have a
Good for
motherboard
you.
right here.
Wow.
Okay.
Visual aids.
And this motherboard is a motherboard for a laptop.
Wow.
And the reason you can tell that's for a laptop is look at the size of it. That here I have a laptop, which I'll put over
it has to, yeah.
And you can see that this could actually fit in there. You know.
It's so thin. It's so
Well, it has
unbelievable.
It really has to be thin, and that's one of the things that adds to the expense of a laptop is the components have to be smaller. And another challenge that designers have with small components that are in tight spaces is that they run very hot.
I would think so.
And
With all that on there, yeah.
And heat is the enemy of anything electronic. So you always have these problems of having to get the heat away from the components.
As we have found out recently with
Yeah, well, you
phones,
look
cell
at the problems with lithium batteries
Yep.
on Samsung
Yeah.
phones. So now, can you find the CPU
Yes.
on this?
Amazingly. It's that thing right there. Isn't
This
it?
is the CPU. Now, we just see the corner of the CPU here, because if you remember, this was the CPU, okay?
Now, why is it kind of tucked in there?
Well, the reason it's tucked in here, this is a somewhat innovative design for dissipating the heat from the CPU, because this will run very hot, like you can fry an egg on it.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges is to get the heat away from here. They have this copper path, if you will, that will take the heat away and take it to a heat sink. And then this heat sink will have a fan. Look at the size of this fan. Okay.
Wow.
Look at
Now,
the size of that fan, how thin that is.
Where does that
And
go?
that would be mounted in some way near this heat sink to actually blow the heat out of the system.
Okay.
Right. So you always have to think in terms of getting the heat away from the system.
This is amazing.
Now, in here, there's also RAM.
What is RAM?
Well, RAM stands for Random Access Memory.
Okay.
Okay, and it's the another parameter that you want to understand when you're buying a system, because you see it advertised all the time.
Oh, yeah, big selling points.
Yeah. How much RAM do you have?
Yeah.
Do you have 4 gigabytes, 2 gigabytes, 8 gigabytes? And RAM is the memory. It's the memory in the system. And the way RAM works is when you start up a program, the program gets read into RAM. Mm-hmm. And the data that the program is using will get read into the RAM. Mm-hmm. And the RAM has to be quite fast, because the RAM has to get the data and program into the CPU for the CPU to do the work. And this is RAM right here. So you can see here, this is RAM. This is actually a gigabyte of RAM.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a gigabyte of RAM.
Although
Well,
not as much as it used to be.
if you wanted 4 gigabyte, 1 isn't much.
1 isn't much, yeah.
Okay, now you'll notice on this motherboard here, there's 2 slots in here. There's 2 slots where I can put RAM
one
in
on,
here.
okay, on top.
Okay, so I could put another stick of RAM, which
Wow.
I could put another stick of RAM in here, and that would give me 2 gigabyte. Now, if I wanted to go to 4 gigabytes, I would either have to find a memory card that's this physical size that holds more memory. More memory.
And will that take it? Will that accept it? If it fits, it'll work.
It should,
Yeah.
but you should never assume that.
Yeah.
You always need to put it in and fire your system up and make sure the system detects it. But generally, if you can find the memory, and that can be a trick, find the memory in the right size, it should work.
So would you actually take this thing, the laptop apart and attempt to do that? Or?
Yeah, well,
Blech.
on a laptop, you would
Scary.
find that RAM would probably be under this. So it's one screw,
okay.
and this thing would pop up.
Okay.
And then I could
Okay.
put the
Still kind of scary.
put the memory in there. Now, you should never do that on an area that's going to generate static electricity or anything
No,
like that.
I
You want to
wouldn't
have
think
a anti-static map, be properly grounded, and so that's how you would go about that. Now, not all RAM looks like this. I mean, I have some pieces of RAM here. You can see that's much larger.
Now would that go in a like a desktop unit? Or?
Well, it might go in a desktop unit, or it might go in a laptop that has a motherboard that
okay.
accepts that. I have another motherboard here that's a little bit different. This happens to be out of a desktop. You can see here, this is much thicker.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this would mount in sort of like this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and you can see back here, this would take memory of this size.
Okay, that looks familiar.
Okay.
I've done that.
Of that size, and this can take 1, 2, 3, 4 slots. So if I could put, say, I think these are 2 gigabyte sticks, I could get 2, 4, 6, 8.
Oh, okay.
8 gigabytes here. So, so there's different configurations, and you need to think about that when you're buying your system, because you might want to have a certain ability to be able to expand how much memory, but you may be limited.
Yeah, it's not as straightforward as it
Yeah,
sounds. Yeah, there's
yeah.
more to it than that. Now, how much RAM do you have in your systems?
I have 8 gigabyte is what I have on my systems. Now, normally for systems, I recommend people, if you do a little email, some browsing, run word processing, things like that, 4 gigabytes is generally of a good amount of memory, and that should do fit most people's requirements fine. In my case, I have more because I have a lot of applications that I always leave open.
Oh, yeah, that'll do it.
I have, when I have a browsing session going, I may have 10 or 20 tabs open, so I'm looking at 10 or 20 tabs at one time because I have a very short attention span.
Well, I was going to say
I
that.
sort of
Doesn't that blow your mind?
move things. So depending on the number of applications you use and what applications you use, that's going to dictate how much RAM you're going to want to have. So
Amazing.
can you find where the CPU would go on this particular motherboard?
It's probably cheating, but is that it? Right there?
That's it. Yeah.
Now so it snaps.
That would go like
oh,
that.
it snaps in there or does something.
That would go like that.
Now, how does okay.
You know, and you know, different ones connect in different
ways,
fashions.
okay.
They lock
Okay.
in, but that's what that is.
Now, if a computer program and all its data is loaded into RAM when it's running, where is it stored when it's not running? So if you're done with your program,
Yeah.
you have all this stuff, where does it go?
Yeah, good point. Because when you shut your machine off, RAM loses everything.
Pray a lot.
Okay, RAM is what's called volatile memory.
Okay.
Meaning when there's no power going to RAM, you lose everything that's in it. So where we store our programs and our data when the system is shut off, we will store them on a disk, on a hard disk. And this is a hard disk.
Now, is that for a laptop?
This one is for a laptop. However, you can use disks that size in a desktop.
Amazing.
And I've even seen them smaller. And this particular disk holds 500 gigabytes of data. So maybe we should, giga means billion.
Yeah. Start with mega.
Okay, so mega is million.
Yeah.
Okay, millions of units. So if
Okay.
you have 10 megabytes, you have 10 million,
10 million, okay.
units. If the RAM was 2 gigabytes, you would be able to store 2 billion units
Oh my.
on
wow.
this.
Amazing.
And this is 500 gigabytes, so you could store 500 billion units of information here.
Amazing.
And the way this works is this spins around very fast, about 5,400 revolutions per minute. And this has this little arm that goes back and forth, sort of like this, as it's reading and writing information on here. And there's 2 platters here. I can see two platters on here, like 2 records stacked. And that's spinning around.
So does it start on one, and then when that fills up, it goes to the other one, or it just randomly?
It's not random. There's certain algorithms on how to efficiently write to a disk drive, and those are done in what's called a device driver. Have you ever heard?
Oh, yes.
Have you ever heard that term, device driver?
Yes.
I need a new driver.
That
you know.
pops up on my computer
Right. Well,
periodically.
disks have a driver that takes
Okay.
care of reading and writing information to and from the disk. Now, you may say, well, 500 gigabytes is a lot of something. Okay, but if you're storing a lot of pictures, videos, music, you can fill up disks a lot quicker than you think.
I have.
Yeah, I know you have.
I have. And it's scary because you think, oh, this will last me for a long time. And then you look and even here when I'm working on things, it's, oh my goodness, I thought I had all kinds of space
Right.
and I don't.
Right.
Now, how big a hard drive should somebody get?
I think nowadays, where people are so into taking pictures and videos and watching movies, I would probably get a terabyte anyway. Now, a terabyte,
Yeah, I was going to say, what's a terabyte?
Okay, is 1,000. You have
1,000
megabytes, which are
Millions.
gigabytes, which are billions, and terabytes, which are terabytes. It's the
trillion?
next
Trillions?
Trillions.
So a terabyte is a
Is
thousand billion?
1,000 billion.
Oh my.
Yeah, but you really need to understand what those units represent, and we're not going to try to get into that
Be here all day.
But I do find that I have a ton of pictures that I manipulate, and
Yeah, I do too.
having the storage is
Yeah.
is always good. The average person, if you got at least a 500 gigabyte disk, that would probably do you all right. And disks are always replaced. Those are easily replaced in a laptop, because one thing you should notice about these disks is this has a lot of moving parts, right?
Yeah.
Spinning around. So it has bearings in there that can go bad. Has this mechanical arm here, so that can go bad.
So you could replace it? You mean
Yeah.
a bigger one or?
Yeah, if you have a hard disk crash, meaning your disk is getting noisy, or you're just having problems reading information from it, oftentimes you'll take this out, try to save all the information that's on it, and then you'd put in another another disk and copy the information to that.
So how would, that's probably a whole other topic, but how would, you got to get the information that was on that into the new one?
Well, that's going to be the hook for the for people to watch the next Tech
one,
Talk when we
yeah.
talk about backing up data and how important it is to back up data.
We got a little mini-series going here.
Because you don't want a situation where you have all your data on your disk and then your
if it gets fried.
your disk is fried and you can't get it. So having backups are important.
Then you go jump off a building.
Yeah. Some people
have. Yeah.
Some people have.
You talk about all these things spinning. I feel like my head is spinning a little bit. But going through this and actually seeing these things makes a lot more sense to me. You know, if we physically see it, it's mind-boggling. But when you see it, it really
it helps.
It helps.
It helps.
Yeah.
Now, you have these systems and you have all these things you have to connect to it. Like when you have a system like this, for instance, you may want to have a camera on it. You may want to use a mouse. You know, there's just a range of different devices that you want to put on that.
Printer.
A printer.
Printer.
You may want a printer, scanner, scanner combination. So that's done through what's called USB.
And what does USB stand for?
Well, USB is Universal Serial Bus. And on this particular system here, there's one USB connection.
Just one?
Just one, and that's what I said, because this one is taken up by the mouse, by the wireless mouse.
Yeah.
So then that means I don't have any more USB connections. And what I would recommend to people when you're looking at purchasing a computer is you might think about the different devices you're going to use with that computer. And you know you're going to have a printer.
Yeah.
You're probably going to have a mouse. And there may be some other devices. So,
and with a desktop, you've got a keyboard. This has the keyboard in it, but with a desktop, you've got a keyboard.
That's correct.
And I fill those slots up very quickly.
Yeah. So you may, so you should consider how many USB ports that you have. A laptop typically, you can have 2. You know, if you have 3, you're very lucky, and you're probably going to be paying for it. You're probably going to be paying for it.
None of this is cheap.
But 2 is good, and there are ways that you can extend the number of USB things, because I know you have a technique for doing that. It's kind of like plugging in an extension cord with a whole bunch of
things that you hope won't blow
outlets. And looking back at our motherboard here, we see here, these are the USB ports on this. On this motherboard.
3, 2.
Well, this has 2 USBs and 1 HDMI, which is a little bit different connection. That's if you wanted to go to a smart TV or something like that, and then an Ethernet. So, but to put this motherboard in context, because this looks like a skeleton here, it would actually look like that. You know, this is the outside that we're seeing on it. You know, inside, outside.
We covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more.
Yeah, those are the big ticket items. The CPU, the RAM, random access memory, USB for connecting various devices. We've talked about hard disks. We've talked about the importance of cooling.
Very important.
So
I think that, though, this has been very good, not just for the new user, but for the experienced user, because the more, I can't stress that enough, the more you know, and the more helpful it is. And talk to this man, because he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, it'll enable you to make a better decision each time you buy. And when you buy something, don't think that, okay, this is the last purchase I'm ever going to make.
Oh, no.
Okay, because what's going to happen, you know, I turn these things over every 2 to 4 years.
Oh, I feel better.
I want to, you know, get something with a little more capability to it. And,
And
more
technology changes so fast. that
technology
You
changes.
can't keep up
and-
with it.
And you get these websites and applications that are assuming you have more powerful CPUs,
Right,
and they
right.
require more RAM.
Right.
So they don't run as effectively on a older computer. So
I've-
sometimes it's time to upgrade.
I've noticed with the one I just upgraded this summer and the one that I had just before this, it's so slow.
Yeah.
And I look and I go, oh my, the
Yeah.
little 4 or 5 years, I think, was
That's
when I
right.
got the other one. And there's no comparison. So, you
Yeah.
get spoiled very quickly.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We still have a lot to cover on this topic, but this gets us further down the road in understanding. So that's it for this Tech Talk. Practice, 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 and we'll see you next month.